goes into the reports that we see and that we pass up to the feds. What I want to say, first of all, you all know how to do client file documentation and you all know how to do reports. So there won't be anything that is earth-shattering in this conversation. And we really want to get to some of the more in-depth possible things. So the way Kelly and I have kind of structured this, which isn't necessarily conducive to the process that we have here, it's probably more of an in-person type conversation, but we'd really like this to be a conversation. You all are out in the field doing this work and doing the documentation. We're looking at it from a monitoring standpoint and from a programmatic standpoint. Yes, we've done it, but this is more a conversation about why things should be documented and how things should be documented. There's much inconsistency across the state on how client file documentation is done. And so I'm really hoping to have a conversation here with you all that helps us to kind of start, not standardizing, I don't have a better word in my head right now, but to be able to go through and talk about what are some of the consistent things across domestic violence programs that we should be seeing? And what are some of the things that we just shouldn't see in a client file for a domestic violence shelter? You all may or may not know my history. I have been doing work in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault for almost 20 years now. It actually might be 20 years. I haven't done the math in a while. But I started off doing crisis line work in Ohio, came to Tennessee, worked in local programs, ended up at the coalition for a stint. After quite a few years at the coalition, I ended up going to the state where I've been doing lots of macro level work. And so what we'll be talking about today is kind of one of my passions, because I like to talk about how it feeds up from the ground to get to the top, because I see that so clearly. Kelly Peters, who is a senior program manager at OCJP, who we stole from the coalition, and are very grateful that we got to steal Kelly from the coalition, is one of our experts in domestic violence and in shelter work, and she works with all of you, I know, on different things. I'll let Kelly introduce herself to you all.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is Kelly. I have been working with victims of domestic violence and sexual assault for right around 20 years, like Jennifer. I started out as a member of a board of directors for a domestic violence shelter. I then was on staff there for a domestic violence center in Lenore City. I then went to the Family Crisis Center in Knoxville. After that, I went to the Sexual Assault Center of East Tennessee, then went to the Coalition, and then Jennifer stole me. So now I'm with OCJP for almost 2 years now, going on 2 years.
Yep.
So yeah, so Jennifer and I have a lot of experience with client files and just want to help you guys out with anything that we can.
So I am open. Please post your questions if you are on mute, which probably most of you are on mute, but feel free when we're on slides. If questions come up, just post that you have a question or you have things you want to say, and we'll make sure we stop on that slide so that we can talk and have a conversation. Because I know that there may be things that are said. I don't want to be one of those where at the end we have 60 questions, but everyone hangs up. So I'd really like to be able to talk about it when we're on the different slides. So post them, and when Heather starts seeing stuff come in, we'll just stay on that slide and talk them through then. So what I will do is start the presentation then. If I can, there we go. So this is the orientation of client files. You all can read. So I just like to talk about the purpose of a client file, because I think when you're working in programs, the purpose changes based on what is happening with your clients. If you're a shelter, if you're a sexual assault program and you're seeing individuals, they become more about each particular appointment or meeting. But you have to look at what the purpose of the file is. I'm going to talk specifically about domestic violence client files now. I think when we get to a shelter, sometimes the client file can become a way to share information with staff about what's happening in the house. The client file is really about the client. It shouldn't be to share what's going on in the house, the community, other people. It should really just be focused on the client and what the client's needs are. And it should be focused specifically on the service and activities that that client is receiving. And that's what we get to reporting on. The other piece, though, that is often missing in client files when we're looking at them is we miss the fact that it's really about progress. So oftentimes we document specifics, like client needs to call call the mental health agency, client needs to contact housing. We miss the part about what steps a client has taken since we've last sat down with them and gone through a case plan or a case management session. And I think that's not just based on they've achieved something like housing. It's also the progress with their safety and their emotional well-being. Kelly, do you want to add anything to that piece?
So I think part of that too is if you have a shelter and the staff person that's been working with the client leaves or is on vacation or whatever, there's another person that's going to pick up working with that client. And it's easier if you guys know what's going on. So understand, okay, this is what the client said they're going to do. This is what they've worked on. This is what the advocate said they're going to do and what they're going to work on. And so the advocate that then goes in and picks it up, instead of going in and having a full-on conversation again with the client, which is just not appropriate for the client, is, you guys know where the other person left off and where you need to pick up. So it's easier. It works easier for the staff. It works easier for the client, and just documenting what needs to get done and who's to do what, and then when it's been finished. And it helps stream things. And it also is less, stressful on the client because they're having to go in and tell the same thing over and over again to different staff.
I think the due diligence piece is also important. We have to remember that we can't put the onus of everything. When we read a lot of these client files as a part of monitoring, staff you are really good at documenting what the client has to do. And I understand that. That's from a CYA perspective. You have to cover yourselves and document that you have given the client everything and the client knows the next steps. That part is brilliant in the files. But there is a piece that is missing in many files around what the staff is doing. So making sure in the client files that there is a level of what are the next action steps for staff too. Do we have any questions or anything that we want to talk about on that slide?
Nothing has come through.
Perfect, Heather, then I will move forward. Okay, so the approach to the client file documentation. This is the piece where it should only focus on the work with the client, not the client themselves. What does that mean? One of the things that we're seeing in a lot of client files is more information than is needed on what all these surrounding issues are with a client. That the client has a criminal history, that the client has significant and persistent mental health issues, that the client has, these files are for domestic violence services. And the majority of people in these files, now if you are a mental health provider, absolutely you should be documenting things around their mental health and their status and their emotional well-being. But when you are not a mental health provider or you don't have the expertise, and even in a domestic violence file, if those files are subpoenaed, then you have a large burden on you if you are documenting things about their alcohol and drug history, their HIV history, if they're a sexual assault victim and you're documenting that they have HIV in their files. We see that on a lot of things. Those are things that you're not a medical provider and you're not a doctor and you're not a mental health provider, you're not a LADAC. And so you're taking superfluous information or even self-reported information, but you're putting it in a file that could be subpoenaed. And you're going to be questioned, and your credibility, if you are subpoenaed to court, will be in question if you are putting things in that file that you are not qualified to have. So I encourage you, and this is a huge issue, so I should be seeing questions popping up, because this is in many files. But what you need to be putting in there, so the expertise of your file, of your program, is to be a domestic violence program or a sexual assault program. If you are a SAC in Nashville, there should be therapist notes, and therapists should be keeping those. The advocates might have a completely different file and not be in the same file, but because the advocates aren't going to have the same level of qualifications. Now, In a domestic violence shelter, you have one file. You don't have mental health services in your file, most likely. So what you're looking at is if a client comes in, you can document that she smelled of alcohol if she smelled of alcohol, but it's factual. It's not, I think she has an alcohol and drug problem because she keeps going out late at night. You have to be factual and you have to stay within your level of expertise. Kelly?
I think sometimes what we've seen in some of the client files is basically staff are putting in their own thoughts, and these can't be subjective. And so when you're putting in your thoughts of how mom interacts with the children or how mom interacts with other clients, or client A and client B got into a fight over cooking, things like that don't need to be in the client file. You're making a assumption of how the mom parents the child that may differ from how you parent your children or how you feel people should parent their children, and you can't put that in a file. If you have a client that's in there that is going through a divorce and a child custody case, and you're putting in there that you feel that mom disciplined the child in a way that you didn't feel was appropriate, that could cause issues for the mom in a child custody case. And so you just really need to make sure, as Jennifer said, it needs to be factual, not subjective.
And I think the most important piece, and this is one of the things I was trained on in my early days, and that was a long time ago, like 97. No, 96. So you have to remember and think through, if I put this down in this file, how will I support this in court, and am I qualified to support this? And then the other side of that is, how will this hurt her in court? And I'm not saying you don't document the facts. If you see mom yelling at her child and going off, perhaps that is something you need to take into account, and perhaps that needs to be put in the file. But perhaps it doesn't if it is a one instance and it has happened right after a court date. Perhaps that's a conversation, but when there is a pattern, you document the pattern. So I'm not telling you that you can't document it. I'm saying you have to think about how are you going to defend it in court, and how are you qualified to defend what you're putting in there? And then how could this affect her, and is it a pattern that is happening? Okay, come on, there should be questions. There's nothing, Heather. We have crickets.
Nope, not so far.
Come on, guys. Give me one question. I'm staying here until I get, or one statement. Somebody's got to be the person. Do it. Oh, I saw some people on this call that talk all the time. I think I saw Ida. Come on, I'm calling y'all out now. I saw Beverly. Oh, yeah, there are a lot of people on this as I'm going through this. Okay. Not a single person. I'm sad, Heather. They're not going to talk to us. Okay, next. There we go. Okay, these are the basics. OCJP, when we come out, we need to see these things. I want to say something. Some of you have eloquent files with pages of documentation. OCJP wants to see a level of documentation, but we're fine with bullet points about what you covered in that meeting or what you saw that day. Just so you know, OCJP does not require, your agency has its own standards, so I'm not questioning any agency standards. Just want to be clear for you all. OCJP just requires that it be documented so that you can get, so that the activities and goals that you're doing are documented and can be tracked to the report. An important thing that is often missed, they have to be signed or initialed by the service provider. This is for a couple points. Number one, when those files are subpoenaed, you want to make sure that the right person and their credentials are tied to whatever it is that's in that file and in that statement. So if somebody puts in there that they have a mental health disorder and they're bipolar, then I hope that's somebody who has a degree that allows them to make that assessment. And a sidebar to that is, you never want to put down, if a client tells you their doctor told you that they're bipolar, while that may seem factual, I wouldn't put that in there because, number one, your whole staff is going to start biasing against that client. And you don't really have, that's hearsay. In court, that's called hearsay. It's not factual. Everyone understand hearsay? Does anyone have a question on what hearsay essentially is? If you put something down that someone told you, someone told them, that's hearsay. It's not admissible in a court of law, and it shouldn't be admissible in your files. Did we get a question or a comment on that one? Come on, that was big, guys.
We do have one question. It's about a specific issue. It says, the disciplining of a child did happen in shelter. Is disciplining a child considered domestic violence if he or she is spanked or put in timeout? There's a further question that's on those same lines. Can you answer a question about child abuse reports, documenting in shelter files or hotline crisis sheets regarding either the abuser or the victim?
Both good questions. Okay, let me get to the first one again. Let me see if I can make that question. Okay. So I'm going to do the easy one first. Documenting in shelter files or hotline crisis sheets regarding either the abuser or the victim. If you're making a call to DCS on either the victim or the abuser, yes, you document it, and you document exactly what you reported to DCS. That should be in the file because that is a factual thing you did and you reported it. So let me know if that answers the question, but I think that, I know you have to document that. Now I'm going back to the other one and seeing if it has a different nuance. The disciplining of a child did happen in the shelter. It is. So here's the issue on the spanking and the timeout. The spanking and the timeout is a domestic violence shelter standard. And standard's probably not the right word, but in the state of Tennessee, you're allowed to spank your child and discipline your child. It's the excessive that DCS wants to know about. So first off, you can't if you choose to report that, DCS will take the report, but an investigation is not going to occur. There has to be more information that leads it to be abuse. Spanking is not considered abuse in the state of Tennessee. And you can discipline your child, but yelling at your child is not considered abuse in the state of Tennessee. We know that there are nuances because of our profession, and so we should have those conversations with the client. And in my mind, and I think, Kelly, please chip in after I say this, but in my mind, it's having that open and honest conversation. You might not be allowed to yell in shelter, and you might not be allowed to spank in shelter. But when they get out on their own, they're going to be allowed to do that, and DCS isn't going to intervene. So it's having a really honest conversation with them about, you know what, you can't do that here. And because of that, whatever your consequence is, that's the consequence. We have to talk about why you did that. Is that the only method, or could you try a different method of parenting there? And then what is the consequence if you try a different, because if they've used spanking up until coming into shelter, which is legal in the state of Tennessee, so they've used that up until they come to shelter, and then the kids learn real quick that they can't spank anymore, then mom needs to learn a new mechanism to use, and that's going to take time. How many people on this call have ever tried to lose weight? I'm going to guess every hand may or may not have gone up, but probably should have gone up. We've all tried to lose 5 pounds. Every time we try to lose that 5 pounds, we cheat at some point. Changing a behavior like spanking when that is your primary way of disciplining your children, or yelling. And I'm a voice raiser. My son tells me that all the time. When I get mad, I raise my voice. He does not like that I raise my voice, but I need help. And he calls me on it now because I told him when I raise my voice, just say, Mom, you're yelling. So that's our thing now. He goes, Mom, you're yelling. And then I take a deep breath and I calm down. I'm not irate, but I just raise my voice really high. I can't change that with my level of education and knowledge about violence. My immediate reaction when I get angry is to raise my voice. My immediate reaction when I try to lose 5 pounds is that I want an Oreo. So you can't come into shelter, sign a piece of paper saying you're not going to spank, and then parent your children. So I recommend in that regard, since reporting it to DCS doesn't work, I wouldn't put it in the file. Kelly, I know I went on a tangent, but add what you want there.
No, I completely agree, because there is a level of what you're used to doing, and we're asking you to completely change everything that you're doing because you can't do it in shelter. And so it's a learning curve. And it's some kids don't respond to discipline in different ways. And so it's working with the mom, it's working with the child. And so those things you need to take into consideration on how you're going to handle it. And you need to work with the clients on discipline of their children. And that is a conversation that you're going to have. And it's not an easy conversation. I mean, you're going to have to sit down and have a conversation and talk to a mom about dealing with their child, which is the most, it's the hardest conversation you're going to have with them, as far as, hey, the way that you're parenting your kid may need to be done a different way. I don't want somebody coming in and telling me that the way that I'm parenting my children are wrong. But it's something that I need to hear if they're coming from a good place. My only other thing, off topic, but back onto what the slide says, it talks about types of service provided, codes for VOCUS service types or checkboxes. That is the one thing that we have the hardest time when we're coming out and reading your client files, is we shouldn't have to decipher what service you provided. We should be able to go in there and look at the file, and you're going to have it marked down that we provided this service, and this service, and be able to see that where it's written, and also have checkboxes or something like that, or service codes. Going in and trying to read a file, and we're trying to decipher what was done, but we can't code it as anything because you guys didn't code it as anything. I've worked with several agencies on how to redo kind of their paperwork to do that, to capture these things. But we need to see what services were provided. And you guys need to be coding that correctly, because you need that for your reports. It makes your reporting easier. And that was my little soapbox on that. So, Jennifer?
Oh, I saw that there was another question, a couple other questions. So I was looking at those. And there was a question about if a client tells us something they are having difficulty. For example, client reported she is having difficulty and feels like she may relapse. Is this considered hearsay and not allowed in the file? It wouldn't be hearsay because the client is telling you that, but I don't know that you have to put all the details about that in the file. If you're not a LADAC or a mental health provider who's done substance abuse, who is an expert in substance abuse, I think for me, I wouldn't want to put that she thinks she's going to relapse and I talked her down from it. I may very well have done that. I don't have a LADAC, and I talk friends down from stuff all the time with drinking too much or, other things that they may do. But I wouldn't necessarily document that in that way. What I would document with that is, client stated she was having a bad day. I provided supportive counseling, and she reported she felt better afterwards, or she reported that she wasn't going to, that she wasn't going to leave the shelter tonight. But I don't know that I would put the relapse piece in it, because then if I'm questioned about relapse and it goes to court, there are two possible outputs. Number one, all I'm qualified for in a domestic violence shelter, unless I'm there for a specific reason, I am to provide supportive counseling, advocacy, and info and referrals. So the activities I would document if she came to me and talked to me about relapse would be if I provided her a referral for AA, and I would be factual about that. I would put in it, after discussing her bad day, I provided the following referrals: AA, counseling, and whatever. Those are factual, and I'm qualified to do that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I would think about the fact that I don't have the credentials, so I don't want to get in. I just want to provide supportive counseling. I don't want to put anything in those files that are going to question my credentials. Was there another question, Heather? I saw that one, but I don't know if there were others.
There are a couple more, so I'll just give them to you one at a time. The first one is, if complete sentences are not required in a file, couldn't that make for a lot of confusion and misinterpretation?
That would be a yes. I think that if you're going to go to allowing clients, so it's all in how you decide to do incomplete sentences. So in my mind, I can do activities, if I'm documenting what I have to do, which are the 8 core values, many of those can be under a header of, I provided this information or referral, bullet point the rest. I provided supportive counseling today. I don't have to get into a whole lot. But if I'm doing something that's more difficult, then yes, you have to use complete sentences. So it gets to, staff have to write their document so that another staff member could pick it up and know what was required of them to do the next day, or if that staff person quit. I don't know if that really helps with, so it's a yes and a no. They're not required. It can lead to confusion, but it's all in training and follow-up. And that's part of that quality assurance that all supervisors do. And I see that we have a few supervisors and directors on this call. It's periodic audits. I mean, Kelly and I do that with our staff at OCJP, and we're providing services, but we're not providing mental health services or, very in-depth. But we do quality assurance checks. We audit a file or two here and there from staff and just see what's happening in those files. I think Kelly probably audits about 15 every 3 months. I audit probably 15 because I have a broader group I do. But, we do audits. And so every supervisor should be doing an audit of a file probably at least once or twice a week, just to see how it's going and what they can do in conversation and coaching with staff to help them do better. You want to go to the next one?
Absolutely. The next one is, are we supposed to document client disabilities?
So if you're providing a service around that disability, absolutely. And you have to document if they've requested services around their disability. If they've provided you documentation that they have a disability. But if a client tells you, and I used to have this all the time, I'm working on my Social Security because I have whatever, a mental health issue, a substance abuse issue, an intellectual disability. But if I don't have something that's confirmed that they have a disability, I'm not apt to always put that in the file. So, and I think that's Vanessa. So Vanessa, it's not black and white, it's gray. I think anytime that you're doing something around a disability, absolutely you should document that in your file. But just because a client tells you they have a disability, if there's no specifics required around it, you're not obligated to document it. I wouldn't say you can't document a disability. I don't know if there's probably a follow-up question that Vanessa will have on that or not.
And there's one last question. It says, can you expand on the fact that spanking in Tennessee is legal? Is that just in general? For example, if a mom open hand smacks their child on the face and a child screams and cowers.
That would still be legal. It would not be child abuse. Now, is mom leaving marks? Because if mom's leaving marks, that then goes to child abuse. But if it's in discipline, DCS will not get involved. What I would say to you is, it's how you document it and how you have the pattern of behavior. So the first time mom open smacks the kid in shelter, it's the conversation. And then I think that this probably is worse, mom. I understand you're saying it's for discipline, but your child is in a corner. How did you feel when your batterer abused you or threatened to abuse you? If your child is cowering in a corner, then that means that this is a pattern, mom. And then if it happens again after that. So it's, for me, what it is you're not going to get very far with DCS at all. It's what you do with mom and how you help mom recognize that it's no longer discipline when there's the cowering. And then from there, if you witness other things that make it a pattern, then it goes to DCS. I should see some more probably happen on that one there. Kelly, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope.
I'll let Jennifer alone on that one.
No, because I completely agree with you on that. Is if you smack your child or spank your child and you leave a mark, well, DCS probably, if they don't leave a mark, DCS isn't going to do anything. If they do leave a mark, they may be like, oh, okay, you shouldn't do that. If it's a continued pattern, it's a problem. And then they'll be more involved. It's working with the mom on appropriate techniques of disciplining your child.
It's really where shelter law is very different than state law. I'm going to move to the next one, which is probably why we're all very frustrated with DCS all the time, because they don't take it to the same level we do. So the mechanics of documentation, this is just, and we've kind of been talking about this, but this is just trying to make sure that you've got your files where you're documenting what you're doing, you're documenting the activities, you're telling a story, but the story is about them as a domestic violence victim or a sexual assault victim. And yes, you need to look at them as a whole person. I don't disagree with looking at people as a whole person, but your job is as a domestic violence shelter. And then it's just making sure that there's a level of progress being documented. We see a lot of frustration in files where it's, I've told client to do this, didn't do it. Told client to do this, didn't do this. There's a level, and we're going to be working as OCJP is looking towards getting some motivational interviewing trainings out there to help. But we really need to have some documentation that shows that there's some progress being made, because very few victims actually come into shelter and don't do anything new. But our focus is often on housing and court. But there's a whole level of progress that a victim may make in terms of maybe she enrolled her kids in a new school, maybe she's reconnected with her parents and she hasn't been talking to them. Showing some, we'd like to see some happy files. I think that there are a lot of very depressed advocates out there who are focusing on not getting victims to a completely new living arrangement, and instead are really focused on failure because they don't get victims to new housing, and victims either go back or don't make it to where the advocate thinks they should go. I'd really like advocates to be able to show the progress they're making and to see it, even when it's just baby steps. Because again, we've all tried to lose 10 pounds, and it's baby steps. And when you hit 10 pounds, you're very excited. That's small overall in the scheme of things, unless you really weigh a really good weight. 10 pounds is just the start. So, Kelly?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of it is we focus on not really always the good and what they've actually accomplished. I mean, understand going into shelter, is the last resort. It might maybe the only option that they have. And living with 10, 12, 14 other people isn't the best case scenario. And so they're stressed because of that. They have the domestic violence that's going on. They're moving into shelter. They're living with multiple other people that they don't know, that don't interact the same. They all have difference of opinions. And so now it's, okay, but you need to do this, and you need to do this, and you need to do this. And it's always, okay, what did you get done? All right, now you need to work on this. Okay, what did you get done? Well, why didn't you get it done? And it's not, praising them when they got something done. And I'm not saying, they're, 5-year-old children and praise them like that. It's let them know that you support the decisions that they made, and that they're working towards their goal, and that you acknowledge that they did that. Jennifer and I had a conversation about this the other day about praising staff when they do something good, because staff sometimes only hear when they've done something bad, and letting them know that they're appreciated. It's the same thing with the clients, and documenting that they've gotten it done. Sometimes we go in and look at client files and it's like, okay, they were going to do A, B, and C. And then the next report is they've got 3 new things on there, but it never said if they got A, B, and C done. And so making sure that it is legible and detailed enough that that another staff person can come in and know where things were left off and where they need to pick it up. Like I said earlier, understanding what they're needing. Also understand that not all clients are going to move at the same pace. You guys know this. You work with a numerous amount of clients, and they're not all able to move at the same pace as other clients, and being able to work with them at the level that they're at. But also, acknowledging when they've done something, acknowledge that they've done something good, or they've completed something. They're probably at the lowest point when they come into shelter, and acknowledging, that they've made this huge step, and then acknowledge when they get stuff done. Everybody wants to be praised. We should do that with the clients as well.
I agree. I saw some questions pop up. Heather, do you want to tackle those with us?
Yes, we have one follow-up question regarding clients with disabilities. The question is, what do you want us to count as disabled on our report? Just those clients who have a professional diagnosis, or should we include those who self-identify as disabled as well?
On the report, you can identify either. I think it's how you document it in your file. So for me, the feds just want to know clients with self-reported disabilities. So I would put that down, but I wouldn't put the self-reported disability in my documentation. I would only write, so in other words, if they tell you that they have we'll just stay on my bipolar example, that they're disabled and they have bipolar disorder, I wouldn't put that in there. I would just say client reports that she has a recognized disability. So, that's how I would handle that. Kelly, you want to add anything?
I think off of it, I'm just going to go back to what I was talking about a second ago off of the disability thing, because I know that's one of those that we ask on the VOCA reports, and we need to know that, but documenting it in the file is different than reporting it on the report. Back to doing services with the clients, I think sometimes when I talk about, making sure that you're on their level, I think, and I was guilty of it when I worked in a bigger city that had bus transportation. We would have clients that, okay, I need to go apply for 10 care. Okay, well, here's 3 bus passes to get you to the office to apply for 10 care. Well, what if they've never used the bus system before? They're not going to know, okay, I need to get on the bus over by the Walgreens, but then I'm going to have to transfer buses over at the transfer station and get on the bus that goes to such and such. Like, having that conversation with them of, okay, do you know how to use the bus system? If you don't, let me show you how you use the bus system. Because what we saw happening was clients that we were giving bus passes to some clients didn't always get their goals that they had said they wanted to do done. And it was like, for us, it's why aren't they getting this done? Like, they're just not doing it. But then looking deeper into why aren't they getting it done? Well, by us giving them the bus passes was a barrier for them to be able to get their goal done, because they didn't know how to use the bus system. And so having those conversations, because a lot of the times the clients don't want to come to us and be like, hey, I just don't know how to use the bus system. Or, telling us that they don't know how to do something when they're saying, we need to do this, you're giving us the bus passes to do it. And then we've got to come back again and be like, well, I don't know how to do that. So having those conversations, as simple as, do you know how to use the bus system? Or do you know what bus you need to take?
And does your staff know how, if you're a bus pass project? If all new staff will have to ride the public transportation, in my mind, that you're requiring the residents to ride, so they understand either the ease or the difficulty. Were there any others, Heather?
That's the only one so far.
And we will go on to the other, because Kelly and I can make a presentation take forever. So this is just common styles. There are many different styles. Your agency has the style it wants to use. If you don't have a current style that you're training staff on, this is a really simple one. It's called the DAP, but it's essentially doing the data first, putting subjective and objective information from your meeting. So when we say objective, though, I want to be clear, we're not contradicting. What we're saying is your objective information can be what the staff decided for a referral. So this could be, so this isn't, I think the client is drinking again because she was unable to meet any of her goals. That would be an inappropriate objective one. Appropriate objective one was client reported that she had a hard week. Staff thinks she needs longer to accomplish this goal. Or staff thinks she may need to focus on her counseling needs or her referral to whatever first and do smaller steps. So objective needs to be still within a subjective realm, if that helps. Now I should see questions pop up because I'm sure that muddies the water. But it's important to realize there is objective information, but it's not about labeling the client. It's not about, I think she has anger issues. I think she has an alcohol issue. It's objective based on subjective. So if you've got data to put in there, then you might say staff thinks this needs to happen. Your assessment. So staff should be able to put a current assessment and change and augment the identified needs of the client. But when you're making your assessment, it has to be made on the level of your expertise. So you can't make a mental health assessment. You can't make a, in some ways, your staff may struggle with parenting assessments. I was this person. I was the 24-year-old advocate with no children working with women with 4 or 5 kids. And I really struggled with putting my assessments in there around parenting needs. And we have to think about that in our assessment because we're going to be questioned on the stand about why did we think this needed to happen. If mom ends up in a custody battle and we are subpoenaed, we have to be able to back up why we put any assessments and objective information in there and what our qualifications are to do that. A plan, that's subjective. So you should have some level of planning that's put in there to do in between sessions. The other thing that I think advocates struggle with when we look at these is they start talking about housing at the first meeting. I understand you have 30 to 60 days of shelter time and you need to talk about housing immediately, but it is overwhelming. Think about if you just lost your home, you're in court, your life is falling apart, and your first meeting is that you need to start applying for public housing, and you just came from a home, your own home, and you're losing your home. You're going to struggle a lot with going from owning your own home, which in your divorce you might get back if that's where you're at. Again, I'm making up a story here, but you have to think about what you're asking them to do and how it fits into where they came from, and break that plan with all of the trauma issues. What is it that they can do? So that's my thing on the plan. We see in the plan a lot of things that are really big picture that would take me, with my job and everything, if I lost my house today, it would probably take me 6 months to get another house. I'd have to find temporary shelter. I'd have to live with family. So anyway, just thinking about, I'm going to put out to you, my advocate, that I want another house, or I want my house back, but that's going to take longer than I had. So what can we focus on and make on in that first plan and second plan manageable? You can get to the housing after they've calmed down and settled down. Kelly, do you want to add anything?
I think the other part of that is we need to make sure that as advocates, we're not hindering them from being able to reach their goals. And I'm just going to harp on this one situation and then I will move on. We've gotten calls lately about shelters saying, hey, I'm getting a call from this other shelter in another county. or from a client from another shelter saying, hey, my time's up. And they said I have to leave. And then while further discussion with this client, it's like they're having court in this other county, and they're the next person to get on the list, or they're the next person to get public housing, or they've got an apartment. It's just not open for another 2 weeks. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're going in and out. So I don't know if you've stepped away from the phone but the volume is a little bit off. It's okay.
Thank you. Okay, so let's all point out that no one's ever told me that it's hard to hear me. So basically, it's getting, I know, right? It's getting calls from other shelters or clients in other shelters saying that they need to go to a different shelter because their time's up. But yet it makes more sense for them to stay in the shelter that they're in because that's where all of their stuff is. That's where their court is happening at. They're getting ready to move into an apartment in the next couple of weeks. Is it still hard to hear me? Is it my phone?
No,
that's being a mess?
No, it's
no,
not.
You're good.
No, we can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay.
I said that to be funny, by the way.
Okay.
I think that the other piece that's important is the definition of emergency shelter. If any OCJP does not have a predetermined length of time for emergency shelter at this point. So we have not reached a place when we look at shelter capacity rates and client needs that we can say that a shelter should only have a 30-day limit, a 45-day limit, a 60-day limit, a 6-month limit. OCJP has no predetermined emergency shelter limit at this point. We are working on building transitional housing resources throughout the state so that there is a continuum of care, to use the HUD word, to move things on. That being said, at this point, if you keep a client for 6 months, we're not going to have a finding that a client stayed with you for 6 months. We are going to be concerned if you have an exit rate of 30 days or a mandatory requirement that clients move out in 30 days, but your shelter capacity rate is 24%. That would raise a red flag on why you aren't keeping clients longer and you're pushing them to other shelters. Ellie, do you want to save me on anything I just put out there or add to anything I've just put out there?
No, I think what's happening is with some of this is if you're going by we've got a 30-day or we've got a 45-day, but you're having clients move to a different county, but yet they're working on their goals. They're doing everything they need to do. You know, how is that helping the client? It's not. And those are things you guys need to think of.
Okay, now Heather, do we have any questions? Because we might have got something out of all of that.
We have a couple of people who have said thank you, but no questions.
Yay!
Okay, then I'll move to the next slide. If my clicker works. There we go. So this is another common style grid. I won't go through all of this because you'll get the PowerPoint. The one thing I want to say about this slide, and it's minor overall because it's very simple to the other one, but on this one, you have a client goal. Some of your case plans have a goal, but most goals are actually an activity. So there are things, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head that might play into this, but it might be something like you have a goal that well, let's do a personal goal because I'm really good and I've been using this losing weight thing because that's what I'm thinking about right now. If you have a goal to lose weight, that is a hard goal to do because it's actually an activity to lose weight. You are going to be looking at the scale every day. You're going to be trying to see 1 pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds go. And the reality is it's going to fluctuate. But if you have a goal to run, let's say a half marathon, you're going to 1 week walk a whole lot. And you're going to feel good when you accomplish walking 7 days a week for an hour. And the next week, if you're going to run for a minute every 5 minutes, you're going to feel good when you're doing that, and you're going to see yourself build. So there are activities planned into the goal, but the goal is a bigger thing of getting to that half marathon. So for a client, telling them that they're going to get housing and they're going to apply at different places. Housing is a goal, but getting housing is not necessarily always going to feel good. So give them a goal that feels good and that getting housing is a part of, because no one wants to, y'all have to pay your bills too. That's another one. So we don't want to lose weight, but we might be willing to run a half marathon or even, walk a 5K. And that might feel good to accomplish that. But what is going to feel good to accomplish for a victim? Because honestly, the scariest thing for someone who's come to shelter is the day they leave the shelter, because that's become their cocoon. That's why you see all of the failure happening and the, putting off and the issues. And then you see them go back or you see them lose their housing. It's scary to be on your own when you've been under the grip of a batterer and then in a cocoon of a shelter. So try to think of an overarching goal. So that's kind of the overarching. What is the client's current service needs? It's really to have a safe and sustainable life, or to feel safe, or whatever those things are. But I just think that what I like about the grip is the idea of them having a goal. And to me, that's something you can put on the mirror in your bathroom or on your bedroom wall, because I'm one of those people that post things. But that's something the client should be able to post up and feel good about and look at every morning and go, what am I going to do today to get to that? Getting the housing doesn't feel exciting. It feels scary to try to make that all happen and have all those bills. So that's all I add to that one. Did we get any more questions, Heather?
Not yet.
Okay, Kelly, you want to add anything before I click to the next?
No, I completely agree with everything you said.
Cool. Okay, next. We've talked about the documenting within your own level of expertise. This goes back to the second one goes back to not generalizing or making diagnosis, which we've already talked about all of this. The last one I think is where our issues come in on considering whether the information is protected or privileged. You're also putting something in a file for all staff to see. So depending on, and this is something that I know every agency has to think through, but if you have multiple levels of staff all documenting in the same file, and by that I mean service provision. So you have therapists, child advocates, and advocates all in the same one. You have to really think about, can it all be put in the same file? When I was at the Y in Nashville, we had nurse practitioners and therapists and advocates and case managers. We decided advocates and case managers kept the same file. Child advocates had their own files on the children, which were not a part of mom's files, and therapists had their own files, and the nurse practitioners had their own files. And we had, if it was grant funded, we had the ALICE database at that time. I know you all have now like Apricot and other databases, but we had the place where they would put their data, so they would check their service activities. But other than that, there was a plan in place for how, and if monitors came out, they could look at the child advocate files, they could look at mom's, they could look at stuff if they needed to. We would redact all those files, whatever was grant funded and going to be monitored. But we had multiple personal files. It didn't all go into the ALICE database system because some of it was protected and privileged. Now you can build firewalls and different walls and access, so you might be able to do it all on your online system, but you still can determine who has access to what, and you should. Did we get any more questions, Heather?
We have one comment, which is we encourage our clients to set their own goals and take ownership.
That's perfect. And that's really what you have to do. The best thing, clients are going to be most successful when they're directing their plan. Kelly, do you want to add anything before I go to the next one? Because we're almost out of time.
Nope, move on.
Okay. So this, oh, good. We're at the perfect place. So this is how it gets to report. We talked a lot about those client files, but the only thing you can report is what is in the client file. And so for me, sometimes the Excel spreadsheet and the database check boxes end up becoming the best way to document for grant reporting. Kelly, what do you want to share?
I think kind of what I said earlier is if you don't have a checkbox to put down what activities you guys have in your contract that you guys say you're going to do, if you don't have a way to mark off everything that you did with certain clients, then how are you going to be able to report accurately on what activities were done? And so that's one thing that needs to happen is you guys need to be able to mark what activities were done so that when you pull these for your reports, that's how you're getting an accurate number. So whether it's transportation or court advocacy or personal advocacy or info and referrals, make sure that that's marked and not, just generalize everything, because then, we can't see what activities were done and you guys aren't you're not getting an accurate number, and you need to be able to get an accurate number because you need to be showing off all the work that you guys are doing.
Well, and the other piece that I think is that you have to be able to share with each other. I know completing that OCJP report is a pain in the butt. I absolutely know. I've sat there. I've gone through the stacks of paper or, double-checked the databases, and, it's pain. But what I did when I was at the Y is, and I'm certainly not saying I'm a god, I'm just saying what I did. I think that when I got to a supervisory position and I was over the services, I sent that back out to the staff to show them what they had been doing. Because often my staff were saying how busy and how stressed out they were, but I would look at the report and I'd be like, okay, the child advocate was freaking out in my office, but she had only, last quarter when she wasn't freaking out, she had 100 children. This month she had 25 kids. So what was different? And then is what was different the level of acuity for those kids? And so do I need to be looking at, we need additional referral services or an additional agency like the CAC needs to come in when we have because we have a lot of child sex abuse cases? Or is my child advocate burnt out? And so she was in my office every week during supervision crying and talking about how she couldn't do it anymore. But that was because she was burnt out and I'm not taking care of my staff. So I would turn it back and ask some questions so that I could help my staff, because I really think organizational health is looking at those numbers and saying, what does this mean for how we're feeling as an agency? So I have 1 minute. I'm willing to go over if others have questions or want to talk now. Heather, I turn it over to you to make decisions because we literally are hitting the 11 o'clock mark.
We haven't had any new questions come through as of yet, but we can stay on the line for a couple of minutes to see if there are any kind of stragglers that come through. I'm also happy to pass along any questions that come my way if people think of questions later.
And I think everyone has my email, and I am more than happy. I talked to a lot of you all already when things come up. But we're also happy to talk with you at any time, as is Kelly, about what OCJP really expects. We expect good work, but we don't expect you to all kill yourselves. And we know you all have been working with nothing for a really long time, and that just now we're able to do more for you all over the past 2 years. We continue to look at options and abilities to do more. We're entering our next strategic planning phase. And so at this point, send your program manager kind of what you're seeing in your agencies and in your areas that you need. But part of being able to prove it is what's happening in those client files and those reports. And a really sad place is that you have to look at what is coming in those reports to be able to justify increased requests. And that's the part where Kelly and I struggle, because we've been where you all are, and getting those reports done is a huge feat. But when we go to the top level, I go to the commissioner and I say, Agency A needs an additional $300,000. And he goes, well, has the number of clients they've been starting increased? Do they have a waiting list? Is their shelter full? Are they not able to provide services in their communities? We have to be able to have that information on every increase we request. And again, we work for an awesome agency that wants to fund you all and increase it all. But we still have to justify because we have to report to the state legislature how much money goes to every county in the state from our office. And we send that every year, and then we have to justify when we increase or decrease from a county. So just know that we are your advocates and we are increasing on a regular basis, but it all comes down to how do we support the increases? Kelly, anything you want to add?
I just think we should end it on the next slide because it's my favorite.
Oh, you're right. I forgot about that one. Okay. Isn't that awesome, guys? If you didn't document it, it didn't happen. We tried to put that on the bottom, but Dana had a slide that won't let us copy over her Office of Criminal Justice Program.
I tried.
It
didn't work.
Did anything come up, Heather? And if anybody
No,
wants
we
to
don't have any additional questions, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap up.
I'm also trying, if people want to unmute, Kelly and I can stay on, and if people just want to ask verbal questions, I'm also fine if you just want to have a conversation. Kelly and I can sit here and talk for a little while. So we'll if anyone wants to unmute and talk to us, feel free.
All right, well, it looks like nobody has any additional questions, so I'm going to go ahead and say, oh, wait, we have one. So Martita, I'm not sure if, oh, there we go. There's the other half. Is it okay if a client stays in shelter if they have a job, but have bad credit and can't get into an apartment?
Okay, and then it looks like she added on there, is it okay if she stays longer than 9 months? So that's when you guys as an agency needs to look into how long you are willing to let somebody stay. Now, I understand there are some clients that are staying in shelter a really long time. I was working with a shelter the other day that a client's been there for a year. That's where you guys need to look at, can you handle having somebody that long while still being able to bring in people and provide services to other victims as well? And what are you doing with that client to get them to be able to get into an apartment? Are you able to look outside the box and think of other ways that they could obtain housing? We all know that public housing is usually the best route, but it's not the quickest and it's not always the best option for everybody. And so if you have bad credit, you're not going to be able to get into public housing. But can you work with somebody? Can you work with a private homeowner who rents out their home on, are you willing to take a chance with somebody, or talk to an apartment complex and say, look, this is what's going on. They've got a plan in place of how to work and fix their credit. It's just taking a while, but they're working at it. And can you get them into housing that way? It's a lot of work on the advocate side of trying to get it to where they can get better credit. But just think outside the box. What if a client owes an $800 electricity bill? Work with the electric company, see if they can do a payment plan. And then Heather, if you want to jump in on what the coalition can do to help with clients with the emergency assistance fund.
Sure. You know,
but
the coalition
you guys should all have money. Go ahead.
The coalition can help with part of a large bill. We can help with up to $240 per client. There are also other community organizations that help with things like utility bills. And I know that they don't always have money and that they often have a wait list. But, you know, as an advocate, you should be tapping multiple sources and helping them reach out to multiple places. Sometimes churches will help. You know, sometimes community agencies, the coalition, creating a payment plan, like Kelly said, so that they can pay it down, you know, month by month. If somebody has a job and they're staying in your shelter for 9 months, help them set up a payment plan because they have money coming in that they can pay down that bill over time, so that then they can get into an apartment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say last call. Remember that I will be sending out slides and your certificates. I also want to let you know that as you exit out of the webinar, you will see our evaluation pop up that gives us, you know, the data for the training. And there's a question on the evaluation because I know lots of you watch with multiple folks from your office watching on one computer that lets you list everybody who may be watching all together. That way we have an accurate record of who all was on the webinar and everybody who attended. And if you want to contact, you know, any of the three of us afterwards with questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to do that as well. Anything else to add, ladies?
No, just if, like Heather said, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and reach out to us.
All right, well, thank you so much for being on today. I appreciate you, Kelly and Jennifer, for giving your time this morning.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.